Hi everyone, this is Vignesh. This is my presentation for the midterm assessment. Today I'll be taking a small lecture or demonstration of everything I learned in the web development course until the midterm. Uh, so I thought I could start off with Mindmap. I thought I would do it on video like the professor did so that we can just walk through all of the elements. So for me, web development mainly constitutes of two things. Like as anyone would say, it is like the front end and the back end. So in my mind, uh, front end consists of HTML, CSS, and JS for the browser. So this is where we have the client facing side, or this is where the design and the like the wireframes, all the Figma, everything comes into play. So this is more of a designing and developing sort of experience. And when we come to the back end, it's just how we handle requests, how we store information, and how what is the architecture of a server, and it's mainly what is unexposed to the end user. So as I mentioned, designing is a big part of any front end developer or any front end engineer. So we wouldn't be talking here much about that, but apart from that, in from the development point of view, we have three main things that we have in hand. One is the HTML. It's the hypertext markup language. So we have a few things in HTML. So we have a lot of things. It's basically a markup language. It structures our code. So if we think about uh, if you think about a body, HTML is often analogous to our skeletons. So how the content should be displayed and which should go where, and all of the structuring of the web page is decided by HTML. And we have CSS. CSS is called cascading style sheets. So CSS is just how the presentation, right? So what color should a button should be, and is there any animation or the background colors, animation as in the color gradients, and all of those things which add up to the HTML, right? So without CSS, HTML would just be like the skeleton, right? So CSS gives the is like the hair and nails. It gives more definition, and it really like puts out and makes the page much more neat and neat, organized, and more appealing to the end user. And lastly, we have JavaScript. So JavaScript is like full-on programming language which was mainly developed for browsers. We use this JavaScript in front end to add functional elements, right? So anything which so the skeleton is in its own, in on its own, it does nothing. And CSS, it's the content justification is in the HTML. CSS styles the things, and JavaScript adds functionality to a web page. So without JavaScript, it wouldn't do much of anything, right? It just display the content. So if you're looking for a very basic like basic static pages, like I think if we just wanted to just display information like texts or something, HTML and CSS should be fine. But really, if we want our web app to do anything on its own, or if we need to have JavaScript. uh, so we this is also so that's it for the front end. We would be diving in deep within the components of HTML, CS, and JavaScript later when we try to build an application from all the concepts we've learned. So for now, this is what consists of the front end. And right when we move to the back end, here we have a couple of things. So here, what I wanted to mention mainly is Node and Express, right? So Node, and below Node we have Express, right? So Express is a framework which runs on Node. So this is pretty much related to JavaScript, right? And since though JavaScript is mainly a front end component, we have Node engine which runs on servers, and which is responsible for which is responsible for displaying contents, right? So let me just put on these arrows real quick, and we have front end CSS and HTML. And for the backend we have Node, and from Node we have Express. Yep. And let me just add this, and now we come to the database. So here when we talk about database, we are mainly talking about Mongo. We can make use of any database available. MySQL is a really popular alternative. So how all of these comes together, right? So there is a flow in web development. So let's say this is user facing. So when a user clicks on a particular HTML element or something, the front-end JavaScript usually is responsible for the functionality, right? So without JavaScript, when you click on a button, nothing really happens. But since we have JavaScript, all of these three, HTML, CSS, and JS, work together. And when we click on a button from the front end, we go to the Express server, right? So this can happen in a couple of ways. So the first thing, here we have here I'm going to talk about REST APIs, right? So when you talk about REST APIs, this is basically how the JavaScript from the front end communicates with backend. So you can also consider here from JavaScript to Express. So we have get, put, post, and delete, each responsible for a specific operation. So get is responsible for fetching the web page and fetching the web page for the user. Post is we use post typically when we want to like send information back to the server, like a form data. We have delete for deleting the deleting the entries as such, right? So for a deep dive, I wanted to talk about how all of these come together when we use an application, right? So basically the user's perspective and how the flow of data starts, and how it the architecture matters here, and what we do with the asynchronous operations. So let's start with the journey, right? So what a user sees and what really happens. So when the user triggers any JavaScript in the browser, the data gets packed usually in JSON format. We bundle it into a data, and then it gets sent back to the server, right? So the server processes it and it check if it's valid data, and it sees if it is proper, and then we have a communication between the backend server and the database, right? So once once the server thinks that, like, if it wants to store data, it talks to the database, and then it persists the data, right? So the data gets stored in the database, and let's say the connection is closed, right? So if I log in again, so where do I get my data from? So in the front end JavaScript, we have something called fetch, and we make use of the APIs, and we create so Express, in Express we have routes. So we create API routes from where we can fetch specific data. So let's say I have an application, and there is user data, and there is listings data, and there is the owner's data. So for example, if you take Airbnb, right? So we could have something like API slash fetch slash users, which returns every user, or we can have API slash get all owners. So these are all API endpoints. So the JavaScripts, like when loading the DOM, we have JavaScript which triggers the API. The API request is handled by Express, and depending on what API it is, Express talks to the database, and it fetches the collection where the data is stored, and then it gets back the data in the form of JSON, or if it is stored in any other database, we can manipulate it in the form of a JSON. We can send it back to the front end JavaScript, which then manipulates the DOM and loads all the data into the front end where the user will be able to see them. Okay, so for the next deep dive, I'm going to talk about middleware and architecture layers within the backend. So we can think about middleware as a function that executes between the raw HTTP requests and how the business logic handles in the backend. Uh, so we typically write multiple middleware functions that has access to both request and response objects typically. So the middlewares can we can think of middlewares as a pipeline through which all of the requests has to pass through, right? So whichever request comes to the back end or whatever the front end request, everything passes through middleware. So this middleware has a lot of applications. So for example, like let's say our database only handles, and database functions only take JavaScript objects, right? So when we receive JSON objects, we can convert these into JavaScript objects, and we can make them into the JavaScript objects and then pass them on to the business logic. We can also use it for logging what requests comes through, right? uh, and then we have some middlewares which can authorize or authenticate users, and for we especially while having applications where some users are privileged to do some extra operations, we can make the middleware authenticate and authorize the user for that specific actions, right? And we can also especially when we have application which is subscription based, where a specific user who has a special subscription can only access a specific tool or utility within the web application, right? So those are a few applications of middleware. So so we have different types of middlewares, right? So first, as we discussed, is the application level. So where we can use the middleware for our application logic or business logic, right? So where we can use the middleware to log the records, we can have them capture the requests and responses sent, we can parse the body of a data, we can use it for security and authentication, right? So next is the router level, where once we have an admin user, or we have let's say we have something like an Uber where we have a driver's login and customer login, while both of them having different home pages, right? And we once we move on to RESTful APIs, and while making use of public REST APIs, we often come across the concept of API keys, right? Generating API keys so that we can track which key owner has called which APIs and how many times they have called it, and we can limit the rates at which the user calls a specific API. So we can also use the middleware to limit the rates, right? So we based on API keys, we can see who is accessing which API. We can limit how many times they can call the specific API. This is we can notice this being implemented in a lot of like public facing APIs which the companies have, right? So So like if we want to make use of maybe Google's Vision AI model, or some any of the ChatGPT, or some any AI models, or any of the service providers, free service providers, they usually have the rate limiting, right? So these are where middlewares comes in. We can also use the middleware to capture any of the errors that our server or the backend server produces, and we can prevent the program from crashing. Though error handling should happen at every level, we can make use of the middlewares so that the uncaught errors in the server doesn't crash the entire system. So there are also a few middleware architectures or middleware frameworks which we can use. For example, Morgan is a very famous one for capturing the loggings and different things, and especially Passport is a very famous middleware for authentication purposes. uh, we can also write custom middlewares, though it might be a little code intensive, but we can usually write middlewares where we can like limit rate, and we can authenticate based on our own code. uh, so we can also chain middlewares to work together. So we can write multiple middleware functions where the first middleware can receive the request directly, which would be something raw, and then it can edit the request to like modify the request, and it can also accumulate a few requests, like implement a queue or something, depending on the backend. uh, so for example, if we have if we have like logging in, we must make the user login, and then we must authenticate them first, and then we need to authorize the access, right? So we can have two separate middlewares for this, where we can first authenticate the user, check their credentials, see if it's a valid user with what privileges they have, and then we can authorize them for the specific route which they for which they made the request, right? And we can see if they are allowed to access that route, because if by the lack of middleware we will be just eliminating and giving out all of the APIs and handling all of the requests, no matter who it comes from, right? So we can say in these middlewares like logging in should happen first, uh, and then we need to authorize, and before this we would have to parse the data first, and then we need to authenticate, and then we need to see if they have the privilege, and then lastly the last middleware which we might end up calling would be the error handling middleware or something like that. So middlewares generally call next, so triggering the next middleware, and if we have caught an error somewhere, we can pass the error and we can capture the error. uh, Routing and the backend architecture, right? So while talking about Express, so the one of the main things that we can talk about are routes, right? So routes are nothing but routes are nothing but it is like an action based thing, right? So we can have a user route. So before if we are without Express, if we are just writing API endpoints, we would end up having something like get users, delete user, put user, something like that, right? And we should have multiple routes which would take a lot of place. So here I think it should be like REST plus routes, right? So for each route we can have whether if we want to uh, delete a user, get user. So with just endpoint as users, if we get a get user call, we would retrieve the users list. If we have a post user calls, we would create a new user,
put means we can update the user, delete, with delete we can remove the user. So this is how the APIs, like the REST architecture and the routing architecture in Express really comes alive and makes the entire backend more reliable, right? And we can also talk about the parameters, right? So we have data which we make use of in post and put, right? So while get, we can have something like query parameter which ends in something like question mark, so the route, and then we have a question mark, and we can get user is equal to Tim, right? So if we have something like this, we can get all the user whose first name is Tim. So these are all just some interesting things about Express's routes, right? So when we talk about routes, we generally uh, think about organizing the code, right? So in any Express application, we have different routes. We have them separated in different JS files, and when we export them from the routes to the server to make use of them. Uh, so all of these makes troubleshooting easy as well, right? So we have architecture. Lastly, I want to talk about the architecture, where it is very important to have architecture and implement it, so that the troubleshooting and the business logics are all separated, right? So there is truly separation of concerns in the backend, which makes job easier for every developer working in a specific project. So basically, when we talk about architecture, we have a three-layer architecture, which is most prominent from my experience. We generally have a controller, and we have a service layer, or like the core business logic, and finally we might we might have something like data access or database connecting thing, right? Where we connect to the so we connect to the database. So when we talk about the control layer, we generally receive the requests, extract the information which is in the body or the query parameters, right? When we talked about REST APIs and routes, we talked about it. And then we can call the appropriate. So this is the controller is generally uh, like the manager, right? So you can imagine service or business layer to have to be like worker nodes, or the functions, they have their own agenda. They have a separate functionality. The controller is the one which cross checks the data and decides which business logic or which a worker node to call, right? So it extracts the data from the request, and it calls the uh, proper business logic to be triggered, and then it also formats the response, right? So it has a response. So typically in large scale applications, we would have a template for every API. So every API would have a certain keys and certain values. It can decide it can like form the body of the JSON, and it can pass it on like the body of the object, or it can create a JavaScript object. It can pass it on to the service or business, which then calls the data access layer, right? So let's say, for example, I want I call the API, I call the route API slash get users, right? So this knows that I want the users. So let's say we have while returning, we have a JSON file which has every user and his user first name, last name, address, and phone number and emails in it, right? So this calls the business logic, and this communicates with the data access layer, So here we just have code which connects us to the database, and it is responsible for the querying any of the crude operations, right? So create, delete, update, and read operations that we want, and we need and any of the anything to relate with the database, right? So when we put a get when we give a get request to the business logic, it accesses, so data accesses the database, so which would be here. So it accesses the database, it gets back all the users, it gives it back to the business, it returns it back to the controller in the form of a JSON object, let's say the controller, and then puts it back into a JSON and then gives it back to the front end, right? So it moves back to the so it routes, comes here, it goes back to Express, and then it goes to the front end as a JSON object, where the front end JavaScript takes care of the populating of the data, right? So or we can have it in the Express, right? So we can put it back in the front end. So there are multiple advantages by layering the architectures, right? So typically in large scale use cases, we would have multiple developers who are testing and developing and modifying or fixing the applications at the same time. So what happens here is we can have a mock business logic to test the controller. So having this separated really helps people work in the same project at the same time, and we can also have a particular developer or a team to make a specific logic work differently, and it wouldn't end up affecting the controller and the data access layer, right? And we can have tests written with them separately, and then end-to-end use cases separately, so that we would know that each of the individual components to be working good. And then we can also easily scale, right? So when we want to scale up the business logic, so let's say these are hosted differently in cloud within let's say they're running in different pods in Kubernetes. So we can expand this, we can scale the business logic according to our needs, right? So they wouldn't have to be tightly coupled together, which makes job easier for everyone. uh, so so overall, this is the architecture which I wanted to explain in depth. So now we can move on to code, where we can explore a little bit more about HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. We can write a simple Express program. Hopefully, we have time for that, and then uh, we can we can make a simple program there, and then I can show you the different HTML elements and CSS and JS components, right? Yes, so let us just quickly get into the demo where we try to create a learning tracker for web development. So we can create a index.html and here we can okay, so here we can put a learning tracker, and we can have a h1 tag here, and we can put maybe a rocket, should be inspiring, right? Yep. And then we can have learning progress track here. So here we can have HTML880. We can quickly install reload now, I think. So npm install reload, and then we can launch the reload server. Yes, and now we have a heading, and we have learning tracker as the title of the page. So we can try to make entire web page here from here.
So h1 tags goes up to h2 h6. It's mainly used for the headings, and we have a p tag where we can put the paragraph texts here. And then we have a box model where we can make use of the div for any every element here is a box. So yeah, so it just suggests things at this point, so we can just try to I'll just try to explain with this, right? So li to end it, then we can have we can just put this here, and we can end the UL here. So yes, so we have this progress meter. Whoa, this is really cool. Okay, so it just gave us a little bit. Okay, I think I should disable Copilot at this point. Okay, fine. So we have this value of 70, max as 100, and we have a progress tracking thing here for the HTML. So these are some cool things which we can do just with the HTML, right? So I'll try to explain the box model very quickly, and then maybe I can code a little bit off screen and then get back to the Express, so that we can cover a lot of things here. So this we can just select here and it'll show up the box model, right? So so for the HTML we have all of these tags, so which decide how the content goes. And CSS, along with the beautification, it also makes sure how the content is displayed, right? So how much spacing should be there between each of the elements, and how much distance, what color it should be, and all that is decided by the CSS, right? So we have a box model. So when we look at the heading, we see these orange outlines, right? So this is the margin. For every box we can just click here, so we can see the content right here. So the web dev learning tracker, this is the content. And then we have a padding which is currently 0, we have a border, and we have a margin. So we can imagine the border to be the reference, right? So content and border, it makes sense, right? So every content has a border. So two things. So when we have two HTML elements, or when we have multiple elements in a page, which we almost always have, we are concerned about two things, right? So how much space is there between the actual content and the border, and how much space we have between the HTML elements. So the padding takes care of how much space is there between the borders and the content, and then the margin takes care of how much space is there between the HTML elements. So this has a margin here, and then we can see that here we this element has some margin. So if we don't have the margin, the track your progress would be right above the HTML, right? And then it would the web development learning tracker will also be right above the text here. So this is the basic box model. Let me just quickly create the HTML and some CSS, and then get back on this, right? Yeah, so I have written the entire page, and I've included some minimal styles to go with it. Here we have body with background, and I have included the bootstrap link here, and then I have used a bootstrap container, and I've used its margin top and all the rows to give it some spacings here and there. And then I have also used the concept box to create a small grid here with listing the front end, back end, and database, right? So I have separated the database here separately, because typically databases we integrate it with backend, or it's separate as a database, right? So then I've also created a entry here. We have a form here, which has the HTML, CSS, JavaScript options to select from, and then we have what I learned here. So and then it's basically input where we can give like we can type in which we learned specifically. So for example, JavaScript, today I learned about variables and all those things. And then we have my entries here. This is the main part which should be populated by the JS, which I've written. I'll just put it here in some time. So let's just see the front end for now. Okay, so this is how it turns out to be, and we can see the colors here, and then the Dropbox working and what I learned here. For now it does nothing because there is no JS or there is no backend for it to work with. So for now it's just a front-end static web page. So for explaining basic CSS, we have background color as if I here, so it's hex code. We can also put something like black here, which would do us no good, so I'll go with beige. Sorry. So you can see how the HTML is being the web page is being modified by the CSS. And if we want this color to be we have also a color picker. If you want it to be a little bit lighter, I can choose it here, and then it becomes a little bit lighter. And then if I want this to be maybe yellowish, I can select it here so that this becomes yellow. So this is what the background color does, right? And we, as I discussed, we have concept box here. So I wanted to explain padding and the box model a little bit here. So let us just inspect elements and look at this box, right? So here we have padding 12 and then we don't have a margin. So we have implemented the margin here though for the div, which is why it's showing like this. Here, so that is something that Bootstrap takes care of. So we can have a border. We can have it maybe black 2 pixels and solid. So we can see all of the cards now have a 2 pixel widthed box in which it is contained. You can have my entries and all these things here. So quickly, I have my code here, so let me just quickly create a script. .js. I have my backend database here. So currently I don't have any entries. It's running inside the Docker. So let me just take the script, then paste it here. So for the next part, we would need Express. So we are going to create a quick server.js here. Okay, so let me just quickly explain the script. So this is a basic script where we have load entries and then we get the form. So this load entries is called when the refresh button is clicked. So we add an event listener on the refresh button. So when it is clicked, we load the entries, and we also load entries when the DOM is loaded. And we have entry form from which we fetch the data from by the ID, topic, and description, right? And then we call the API, right? So here, as we input the form, we have to make a post call, right? Because this in the rest we know that get is to get the entries and post is to put the entries. So now we make use of post method, and then this is the basic headers, the content type, this JSON, and then we append the data as a string, like JSON string, into the body, and then we send the request to the backend, right? So now once the request is sent, we have a result. So what we do is we get the result, and we say that the message is saved, right? So and then we load the entries again so that the entry is refreshed, and yeah, so that's the main function which we are concerned with in the form input, which just loads the data, right? And then we have load entries, which is the main function which we use everywhere to populate the data. So this here, this should here what we do is we call the same API, but then this is a get. So we just call it, we get the response, and then we take the response, and then we manipulate the DOM to include the data, and then put it in the index.html. So in here is where the data will be populated. It is loading right now, so we will replace this once we have data, and then we will populate it using the Frontend JS, right? So this is what the Frontend JS is really good at. It can call the API, it can get the results, and it can populate it. And once if we want to post the request, we can call the same API and then post the request, right? And then we also have a delete entry for deleting the entries. So let's write the basic backend. First we would need Express, and then we should have the Mongo client. As I mentioned, I have my Mongo client here running in the port 27017. So we can try to connect with that. We need Mongo client and object ID from MongoDB. We need to install MongoDB, and then we can have the app Express. Yes, so and then we can use we don't have a public, so we can use dot here. So we can have the Mongo URL. Yeah, it's populated right here. We can have DB name is learning tracker. Let me just check once. Learning tracker, and we can have DB. You can create a empty string for now. Let me just take my Mongo client code and explain that. So in the Mongo client code, what I'm basically doing is this Mongo client is responsible to make connection with the Mongo server. So we don't have a Atlas server right now. We have our local server running, so we can just give this URL MongoDB local 27017 with the port number, and then we can once we connect to it. So here we can have two possibilities. We can connect to the Mongo server properly, or we can have an error. So if we connect it properly, I'm just logging in the console that we have connected to the MongoDB. and the DB would be so the cursor, right? So the client DB would be stored in this DB variable, and the collections is the collection name is entries. It's currently empty, so we can have the entries in the entries collection, right? And then we can catch the error if it is failing, and then we can call the Mongo connection error here. Okay, so first we need to get the data, right? So we need to write app.get. Here we can have the API route /API/entries, right? So, and then here we need to pass an function, so we can pass an async function with request and response, and here we can have the code here. So this should be here, and then here we should have the closing parenthesis here. So here in the body we just we will have a try and catch block, try and catch. So inside the try, what we are going to do is we are going to get the entry, and then okay, so yeah, so we are going to get the we are going to get all the entries, so it should be get entries to await entries collection dot find. Here we need to pass the query here, so the query should be an empty object, so that we get all of the entries which is in the collection, and we can transform it into an array object here, and then we can just append it to the rest.json, and then we can pass it along. So this should work just fine. And then in the catch we need to catch the error, and then I think we so if we are not able to access the database, or if our connection is not stable, we send an error status. We can send maybe 500, and we can say we can send a JSON object back, and we can just simply say that an error has occurred while fetching data. So this would be a simple get function where we try to access the database, and then we get the all the collections in the database, and then we just send it back as a response. So we make this call mainly in the load entries, where we fetch API entries. So the response will be the entry, the collections in the MongoDB, which is sent back to the front end. So once the front end gets these entries, it puts them in a div, it formats it, and then it is responsible displaying it in here, right? So let me just quickly write the post. So I have the code for post as well, so let me just add it here. So we need app.post here, so let me just get the code for post and delete as well, so that we don't waste much time worrying about this. So in the post, the only thing that changes is we don't anymore have entries to fetch from the database and send. We have a entry which we need to post into the database. So the entry which we have to put into the database is available in the request, right? So the request is what the front end sends the server. In the front end, in this form data, we send the topic and description as the request parameters. So here we can just access the we can create an entry object with the request.body.topic and request.body.description, and for extra we are just adding the current date to a local date string, and we can have it as an entry here. And here we await for the entries of collection, and we insert the entry, and then we check the results. So and then we append the id to result.inserted id, because the MongoDB generates the id. We are trying to fetch that id, and then we are just appending the entry into the JSON, and then we are putting it as res. This res will be sent back to the front end, where we load the entries, right? So we load sorry, this res will be sent back to the front end. Here we send the data, and then we get the response, and then we so the response will be appended in the HTML, right? So this is what happens. And in delete entries it's the same thing. From the request, we get the id of the object, and then we have db collections the delete one, and then we pass the id to be deleted, and then in the response JSON we pass deleted if this is successful. If it has failed, we catch the error and we say we have failed to delete the entry. So hopefully with everything around we should be fine, and the code should be running. Let me just run the server. Okay, I've made a typo somewhere. Express. Okay, so should be working now, I think. Connected to MongoDB, and we need to modify the port. Should be running on 3000. Oh yeah, so okay, so the most important part is to listen, right? So we need our application to be listening on the specific port. So we want our application to listen on, let's say, port 3000, and we pass an lambda function here, which basically uh, we can just leave it like this, or we can try to log where the server is running, right? Your server is running on port 3000, console.log, open http localhost colon 3000 in your browser to see the live site, right? So this should be listening. Hopefully now it should listen on this port so that the application is actually visible. Yeah, so there we go. We have the web page fresh and running. Let me just make an entry. I learned to make a hello world HTML page. Yeah, everything's working as intended, and the entry is not yeah, so we have the entry here. So we have an id generated here. We have the topic, HTML description, and the date. So we have the same we have this when the DOM is loaded, we get the entries from the database, we populate it here. And if we switch off the server, it should be persistent, since we are making use of MongoDB, which stores the data. And if we restart the server, your data should still be here, because we have used Mongo to for the data to be persistent, and we can delete this here. Let's now inspect, and we can go to network. We can select HTML. Now we can select CSS. color change. Yeah, so we can see the calls going here. We see that the fetch call, get call, has been made to app.entries first, and then we have a post call. Sorry, so we have the post happening first because we clicked on save. So the post call has happened first, and we could see the payload that the payload is the topic and the description, right? It has went as a payload. And then what happened in the backend is the server took the request, it got the payload from the request, and it persisted it into the DB, it appended into the MongoDB, and then once we clicked on save, the load entries has been triggered, and we have made a get call again from the backend server, and we have got the response with this ID. So once we make another entry, this is the other post request which has been made, so that the backend server has got this data, and then this is the next fetch get request which has been made, which has now returned two two objects, each for CSS and JS entries, which have been made with their ID, topic, description, and date. So I will be posting this basic code in my Git. Check out my GitHub if you want the basic code for this. Thank you for watching this video. I know it's been a lengthy one. Thank you for sitting through. Thank you so much. This is Vignesh, and this is my basic web application using Express, HTML, and MongoDB. Thank you so much.